There's an astonishing coincidence in nuclear physics, one that makes life possible, one that life couldn't exist without, and some people think this could be evidence of a divine creator. For several decades, nuclear physicists couldn't figure out how it was possible that we, human beings, or life at all for that matter, could exist. It seemed physically impossible. In order to understand why this seemed impossible, we need to travel back in time to the early universe, shortly after the Big Bang, before any stars had formed. The universe was composed of only hydrogen, helium, and a whisper of lithium. 3 elements, no light, just vast clouds of hydrogen gas drifting through an expanding void, slowly cooling and gradually clumping together under their own gravity. Then, somewhere in one of those primordial clouds, the core temperature crossed 10 million degrees. Hydrogen nuclei began to fuse en masse, and the first star ignited. Hydrogen nuclei fused to form helium. Helium nuclei fused to form carbon. Or did it? To the early modern scientific community, carbon, specifically carbon-12, seemed difficult, perhaps impossible to forge. To build carbon-12, 3 helium nuclei needed to fuse together. 3-body nuclear collisions are fantastically rare, so the reaction had to occur in 2 steps. First, 2 helium nuclei fuse into beryllium-8. Then a 3rd helium nucleus strikes the beryllium to complete the carbon. Sounds manageable. It isn't. Beryllium-8 is one of the most unstable nuclei in nature. It disintegrates in roughly 100 millionth of a billionth of a second. The probability of a 3rd helium nucleus arriving in that window at exactly the right energy is vanishingly small. And yet, carbon is one of the most abundant elements in the universe. So how does it exist at all? Quantum mechanics only permits atomic nucleons to arrange themselves in specific internal configurations. When beryllium-8 and a helium nucleus collide, the resulting carbon-12 can only hold together if the collision energy exactly matches one of those configurations. If the energy is even slightly off, the nucleons bounce apart. In the early 1950s, a physicist named Fred Hoyle figured out that if carbon-12 had one specific energy configuration, it could be produced inside stellar cores in meaningful quantities. In 1953, he set out to prove that this configuration existed. He traveled to Caltech, walked into William Fowler's nuclear physics laboratory, and, depending on which account you trust, somewhere between requested and demanded, they look for it. Fowler's team was skeptical, but they looked, and they found it, almost exactly where Hoyle had predicted, a measurable physical property of the carbon-12 that meant it could be forged in stellar cores. Without it, life may never have been possible. But while carbon may be the backbone of life, carbon and hydrogen aren't the only elements from which we are composed. So how did the other elements form? The answer lies in the structure of early massive stars. These were not homogeneous balls of plasma, but layered onions, wherein each layer a different element is born. In the outermost shell, hydrogen fuses to helium. Below that, helium fuses to carbon. Below that, carbon captures another helium nucleus to become oxygen. Here, the coincidence of life stacks again. If the carbon-to-oxygen reaction were too efficient, it would consume all of the carbon before any could accumulate. The rate is just sufficient such that both can coexist. Deeper still, oxygen fuses to silicon, and at the absolute center of the star, silicon fuses to iron. Each step produces a more tightly bound, more stable nucleus, and each releases energy, energy that holds the star up against its own gravity. The outer layers burn slowly. Hydrogen fusion lasts millions of years. The inner layers cycle much faster. Carbon, maybe 1,000 years. Silicon to iron, roughly a day. This difference in timescale is what keeps the whole structure stable. The slow-burning outer layers provide sustained pressure, while the inner layers build progressively heavier elements beneath them. Multiple fusion stages running simultaneously, each supporting the one above, until the core reaches iron. Iron sits at the very peak of nuclear stability. Every fusion step up to iron released energy. Fusing iron absorbs it. So when enough iron accumulates at the core, the engine that held the star up doesn't merely stall, it reverses. Not because the entire star has become iron, the outer layers are still there, still fusing, but because the core, the foundation the whole structure rests on, can no longer support the weight above it. What follows takes less than a second. The core collapses, crushing down to a sphere roughly 20 kilometers across, a neutron star. The outer layers slam into this suddenly rigid surface, bounce, and a shock wave rips outward through every layer of the onion at tens of thousands of kilometers per second. Every element the star built during its lifetime gets blasted into space, a supernova. But here's the contradiction. If iron is the most stable nucleus, the point beyond which fusion cannot go, how do elements heavier than iron exist at all? The gold in your body, the uranium in Earth's crust, none of them could have been forged through fusion. Something else made them, and that something else was violent. In the extreme conditions of the supernova shock wave itself, a storm of free neutrons bombards the ejected material. Atomic nuclei absorb neutron after neutron faster than they can decay, and elements heavier than iron get built in seconds. Strontium, barium, some gold, elements the star never could have made while it was alive. But when astrophysicists compared the expected yields of these supernova-forged elements against the observed abundances across the galaxy, measured from stellar spectra, meteorite composition, and the Earth's own crust, the numbers didn't add up. Supernovae could explain some of the heavy elements, but not in the quantities measured. For decades, the total amount of gold, platinum, and uranium in the galaxy exceeded what supernova production could account for. Something else must have been contributing. On August 17, 2017, that something announced itself. A pair of detectors designed to measure gravitational waves, ripples in the fabric of space itself, picked up a new kind of signal. Not two black holes merging, which they'd detected before, two neutron stars spiraling into each other. Within hours, roughly 70 observatories around the world pointed at the same patch of sky and caught the aftermath. A flash of light powered by the radioactive decay of freshly synthesized heavy elements. The spectral fingerprints were unmistakable. Models of the debris indicated enormous quantities of heavy material, an estimated several Earth masses of gold alone. From one collision, two city-sized stellar corpses, each carrying the mass of the Sun, slamming together at a third the speed of light. The gold in your wedding ring wasn't made inside a living star. It was forged in the wreckage of two stars that had already died, already collapsed, already become the densest objects in the universe short of black holes, and then found each other and merged. So when people say, "You are made of stardust," what do they really mean? What they really mean, whether they know it or not, is this. The hydrogen in your body, about 63% of your atoms, is primordial. It has never been inside a star. It was born in the first few minutes after the Big Bang. The carbon and oxygen forming the backbone of your biochemistry are products of stellar fusion, contingent on a specific nuclear configuration that almost didn't exist. The iron in your blood was built during silicon burning in a massive star's final day, ejected in the supernova that ended it. The calcium in your skeleton was forged in similar explosions, and the trace of gold in your tissues was minted in a neutron star collision somewhere in this galaxy, billions of years before Earth existed. Not Stardust, a chemical autobiography of the Milky Way, every element a different chapter, authored by a different catastrophe at a different moment in cosmic history. And this brings us back to where we started. The nuclear configurations that make carbon possible, the one that exists at just the right energy, the one in oxygen that sits just far enough off target, are not inevitable. Shift them by a few percent in either direction, and carbon never forms or never survives. Change the strength of the strong nuclear force by a small margin, and stars either can't fuse hydrogen at all or burn through it so fast that planets never have time to form. The universe isn't just capable of producing the elements needed for life, it appears to be calibrated, almost unreasonably well, for exactly that. Some physicists see this as evidence of something deeper, a fundamental principle, or a selection effect across a vast landscape of possible universes. Others see it as a coincidence made inevitable by numbers too large for human intuition. The debate is unresolved and may stay that way. But Hoyle's prediction remains the hardest piece to dismiss, because he didn't just argue the universe looks fine-tuned, he derived a specific testable number from that argument, and the number was right. 13 billion years, at least 3 generations of stars. Billions of individual stellar lifetimes, each ending in a death that enriched the cosmos slightly more than before, all producing eventually a periodic table complex enough to build a molecule that copies itself, and then a species that traces its own atoms back to the catastrophe that made it. Coincidence or design? The materials didn't know what they were becoming, and now, miraculously, they're asking where they came from. For a limited time only, we are giving out the first 3 chapters of our complete introduction to stargazing completely free. Check our page info for the link.